Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Lower Decks Season 1, Episode 5. Of course, it's Season 1. This episode is called Cupid's Errant Arrow. So this video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Lower Decks. So I have to, of course, start off with the spoiler warning up to Episode 5. If you haven't seen up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So I gotta be honest again, I'm not gonna bury the lead, I'm gonna be up front. This is my least favorite episode of the season so far, which is kind of funny because last week I said that was my favorite episode of the season, but I also recorded that video before I watched anyone else's review. And this time I have watched other people's reviews, and I've heard several people say that last week was their least favorite and this week was their favorite, which is, I don't know, I think that's a bit odd because I'm the exact opposite of that. Last week was my favorite, this week is my least favorite. Humor is a subjective thing, so maybe my sense of humor is just different, but more than that, I would say from a writing standpoint that this is probably the sloppiest written episode, whereas last week I thought it was the most solid, straightforward, well-constructed episode. So I guess, but again, that's a matter of my opinion, I suppose. So yeah, I had a lot of issues with this episode. I gotta be honest, I was actually really enjoying this episode when I was watching it, but by the time we got to the ending, I didn't like the ending. It left a bad taste in my mouth. So, to be clear, I don't hate this episode. I don't think it's terrible. I still liked it. I still enjoyed it. I don't think there's a quote-unquote bad episode in the show so far. Like, so far, every episode's been good. But this is just, to me, it's like the least good of the good, if you know what I'm saying. Anyway, so let's get into this. So this episode had 3 plots, a plot, a B plot, and a C plot. So let me start with the C plot, which involved the senior officers dealing with the... Actually, before I get into that, I want to just throw out the mention that there was no teaser in this episode. Like, when I turned on the episode in CBS All Access, it went straight to the opening sequence, and I was like, wait a second, I was like fumbling around with it, like, did I miss something? Did it skip the intro? But there was no teaser, which, I mean, that's fine, you don't have to have one, but, I don't know, it seems like they should. Like, they set up this format in the first couple episodes where they would have this teaser that's completely irrelevant, and then they would have credits and they'll go into the episode, which I actually mentioned before. I wasn't a huge fan of that format. I didn't mind it. Last week they had their teaser actually contributed to the main bulk of the episode, which is actually, I think, what I prefer, but this week they didn't even bother with the teaser. Again, it's not, I don't want to have anyone think that I think this is a huge deal. It's not a huge deal, but I just thought it was worth noting. Anyway, so C-plot. Let's get into the C-plot with Captain Freeman and the senior officers dealing with this moon that's about to crash. It reminded me a lot of Deja Q. There was a side plot in that episode. Of course, the main plot was about Q becoming human, but there was a side plot about a moon that was, I don't know if it was crashing exactly, but it was decaying in orbit and was causing all sorts of mayhem on the planet, and they were trying to save it and put it back in its proper orbit. At the end of the episode, Q just snapped his fingers and did it as a thank you for the crew. But anyway, so it reminded me of that because it's a similar sort of deal, without ripping off, mind you. It's not like Enterprise, which constantly just rips the plot from a previous episode. It didn't feel like that at all. So I was fine with that. No issues with that. But the thing is that this, I think, to my recollection, unless I'm forgetting something, I think this is the first episode where they had a side plot that just focused on the senior characters and it didn't tie into the lower deckers at all. To my recollection, usually when they have a plot with the senior officers, usually it somehow ties into the lower deckers. And I suppose I did have a slight issue with that of how, because I was expecting at least towards the end of the episode that it might tie-in, maybe something to do with the moon. I mean, you could say, like, the Lower Deckers reference how they're having to work on this, the project to reclaim the moon, but that's it. Like, that's the only way it tied in, which, again, it's not a huge thing, but I kind of wish they did that. But anyway, so I felt like this, but by having the senior officers have their own thing, I felt like I wasn't interested in it because the show's not about the senior officers. To be clear, like, I think they firmly established a dynamic where the senior officers are actually the supporting cast, and the lower deckers are the main cast. So here we got, which ironically is like a lower deck episode plot about the senior officers. So yeah, I'm just not as invested in these characters. But so the plot about the diplomacy thing where all these people are arguing over the moon, like I'm reminded of other Star Trek episodes. It reminded me of Voyager episode Q2, where Q's son was on board, his powers were taken away, and Janeway was had him do all these tests, and one of them was a holodeck program that had a bunch of like squabbling people in the Alpha Quadrant, like Nausicaans, Ferengi, Cardassians, and Bajorans sitting there all arguing over it, and Janeway's like, or Chakotay, whoever's coaching it, was like, okay, have at it, and they come back, and Q2 has everyone like, oh, shaking hands, and it's because he cheated and like rearranged the holodeck program for them to get along. But so it reminded me of that too, where you had all these aliens squabbling over their specific deals, but Freeman comes in and is like, look, you get this, you get that, you get this, and she sorts them all out easily. It kind of reminds me of it. But in this case, rather than her cheating, it shows that she's actually a good captain, which I prefer this because she's still a lesser captain, mind you. She's still in the ship, and that's something this episode makes very clear, that her ship is a lesser ship, because the other ship they come in contact with, the Vancouver, that's apparently more of a high-class ship, similar to the Enterprise, where they get all these missions, and the main stuff, whereas the Cerritos is kind of one of the lower-tier ships that gets all the leftover missions. And that's fine. But I don't, just because she's in a lesser ship doesn't mean she has to be a terrible captain. And that's why I didn't like the previous episode with the, the Time Edict one, where she was a terrible captain. Where here, it shows that she can actually be a good captain. I actually really appreciated that she was actually a pretty good diplomat. She came in, blah, 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 did this and this. But then there's one guy who still wasn't happy. He's like, look, because of the moon is being destroyed, you're going to destroy the moon, get rid of it, it's going to cause harmful stuff to come onto my planet. My society is going to be completely screwed. And then the gag at the end of the episode, which to be clear, I really liked and I really appreciated this, is that by society he meant him and his wife. That he's just some rich asshole who owned this whole moon, and it was just, he lived alone on his mansion with just him and his wife. And as soon as she found out, she was like, what? And she was like, destroy that damn moon. And they blew it up. He's like, no, I just remodeled. Like, that was funny. I did really appreciate that. But, from a practical standpoint, it's a bit silly that she wouldn't be aware already that there's no real society. I mean, all they have to do is scan this damn planet that he's talking about and see that it's not a whole society and it's just two people. But, I mean, some things I'm willing to go with for humor's sake, and this is one case I'll get into later in the episode. There's a couple things I'm not willing to go, but in this case I am willing to go with it, because it's a comedy, and I think the comedy works. So I did really like that. I just feel like it seems like that whole side plot there was just for that one joke. And I think I just felt like it was mostly unnecessary and not very interesting. So, let me get into the B plot, which has Tendi and Rutherford. And this, I'm going to be upfront, this is my least favorite of the side plot with Rutherford or Tendi. I know last week a lot of people were putting down Tendi's side plot with the Ascension, but I actually love that. Maybe being a fan of Stargate SG-1 and the whole joke about ascending, I thought that was great. This one, it was really by the numbers, and it started out okay with them being obsessed with these, like, whatever the hell they were using tickers things. Like, oh, it's so great. And then they got, it was a competition because whoever did finish first got one, and they were like competing over it. And that was, that was good fun. But then when they got into the reveal that the officer guy on the Vancouver was trying to transfer them over so that he could transfer over to the Cerritos, like, I just didn't like that. That was dumb. And again, this is my least favorite of the Rutherford and Tendi side plots. And first of all, I'm sick of that format. Like, this is 5 episodes in a row, basically, where they have the main plot focusing on either Mariner or Boimler or both, and the side plot focusing on either Rutherford or Tendi or both. And you get these things that, throughout the episode, usually at the start and the finish, and maybe in the middle, where you have all 4 characters together interacting. But for the main plots, they don't mix it up at all, and they're going with this straight format of having Rutherford and Tendi constantly be the B plot. And this is 5 episodes now. I hope they mix it up a bit. I think I'm getting a bit tired of that format, and this one in particular adds nothing new to either of their characters, Tendi or Rutherford. Because I think they're, out of the 4, of course, they are the least explored. I have the least handle on these 2 characters, and this episode did nothing to advance them, because basically it's just reinforcing what we already know about these characters, is that they're geeks that are obsessed with technical stuff, and like all the little minutiae that most people would find boring about starship operations, they find exciting as hell. But we already fucking knew that. So, and in fact, like, it shows that they're happy on the Cerritos because all their friends are, but we already knew that too. So I don't think this really advances their characters, whereas last week's episode with the Ascension plot, that advanced Tendi's character because it introduced the element of having, Ascension, a different thing, her being obsessed with, and her, like, desire to be liked. Like, she couldn't stand the fact that someone actively hated her, or disliked her, and that's an interesting character trait. And in episode 2, I believe, it was episode 2, we learned more about Rutherford, about how he's happy in engineering, how he's trying all these different jobs, and realized that engineering was where his heart is. Like, that was a good character trait there, and how it sort of explored more his happy-go-lucky attitude. Where this episode, I don't think it did anything to advance either character, and it's just a bland example of constantly giving these 2 characters the B plot, which I'm frankly getting a bit sick of, and I don't think it added anything new. Alright, so let me get into the A plot. So I was enjoying this at first. I thought it was a very interesting character trait of having Mariner be obsessed with Boimler and how his girlfriend, and how she just could not buy that he had such a hot girlfriend, which I've known situations in real life that were kind of like this, but and it also, it's interesting because she showed her past experience, because that is the main part of Mariner's character, that she, even though she's a lower decker, that she's very experienced, and she has more experience than Boimler and some of these other green cadets. Well, I don't mean Tendi green, I mean as in rookies, as in fresh, but anyway, you know what I mean. So and I think it was interesting that it showed the flashback to Deep Space Nine. By the way, we got a lot of really cool references in this episode. Where she was on her own ship, which was docked at Deep Space Nine. And I almost thought they were going to do a changeling because they were at Deep Space Nine, but it turned out it was just some parasite random thing, which I guess they don't want to get too specific, which I understand. So they showed a flashback that showed her previous experience, and her experience with this direct incident where something seemed too good to be true, and it was. And so that's what was driving her. and that's so that makes sense. I like that. Now, let me take a time out to talk about the references, because in that flashback they had the officers were talking about, oh, Data has an evil brother named Twin, and Lore, and he joined up with the Borg, which is, of course, directly referencing Descent, that I liked, and of course, Tendi was throwing out all these creatures that could be, I think she mentioned the creature from Mantrap, and she said, oh, it could be a changeling, and then they settled on, oh, maybe she's a Suliban, and they actually highlighted Suliban, and she's like, she's not a Suliban, which I love, because, and a lot of people are like gushing over this, because I think this is the first time outside of Enterprise that the Suliban were mentioned. Like, even the Xindi were name dropped in Star Trek Beyond. But this is the first, and because there hasn't really, Enterprise was the last Star Trek iteration before the newer track, so this is the first time they really got around to name dropping the Suliban. So I, like a lot of other people, did appreciate that. And Suliban can change his shape, as we saw in the episode Stormfront, where Silik changed his shape to appear like he was Trip, and he pretended to be Trip for a little while, so that made sense. So it was a good reference. But what bothered me about this plot, as I said, is the ending, because it turns out, because she's like, Mariner's obsessed with trying to prove that Boimler's girlfriend is like some sort of alien creature, parasite, or whatnot, or shape changer, which I thought was an interesting character beat for her. And Boimler, of course, was like really jealous of the hot guy, which to me, that's a very cliche sitcom storyline, and I don't think this version of it added anything new to it, so I kind of didn't care about that, to be frank. And especially like when he went over the top and dressed all weird and acted all goofy, like, I thought that was dumb. Like, I've seen that shit in sitcoms all the time. That was a very cliche thing, so I didn't really care about that. But the ending. So it turns out that there is a parasite, but it's not on his girlfriend. It's on him, that it's stuck on him, and it makes him more attractive to women. Now, I really, really, really hated this. And I think this actually ruins the episode for several reasons. First of all, it reinforces the... I hate to say this buzzword, but it reinforces the Mariner being a Mary Sue. Now, I mentioned this in other reviews that I did, and I want to make this clear again. I don't think Mariner is a Mary Sue. I think there's a couple episodes previously that made it clear she's not a Mary Sue, where she constantly is the cause of causing mistakes. Like the episode where she was trapped on the planet with Ransom, it turns out, like, you think that she was right. She's like, I had the experience, but it turns out she was wrong, and she should have just trusted Ransom, which I really like that episode, because it shows that she's not a super perfect being, that she's fallible, and I like that. So I think the show's done a good job of showing that she has superior experience, but she doesn't know everything. But this, having her be right, I think, ruins that a bit. Because the whole time I was expecting, like, the reason of why that hot girl decided to be with Boimler had more to do with something that wasn't sci-fi or fantasy based, something that was more tangible. Like, maybe she just has a sort of fetish or desire to be with lesser men. Maybe she likes feeling superior or something, or maybe she just thinks his nervousness is cute, or maybe she has her own flaw or whatever that makes her feel lesser. I don't know. I think it would have been better if that was the real reason why she was with them, because I think Mariner needed to be wrong about this. And I actually think that would have made her character a lot more interesting and a lot more dynamic if she were. Because, again, it would reinforce that she does have superior experience, and that she had specifically direct experience that would lead her to believe that there was like some alien or something. But it could show how her experience could lead her astray, and also how she was kind of suffering from PTSD from that experience, and that would cause her to be over to overreact to a perfectly normal situation, which I think would be a great character trait for her. But instead, by having it be some parasite that makes women attracted to him, and then at the end, of course, she bonds with the girlfriend, and she breaks up with the guy. Now the parasite's with Boimler. Now the parasite's gone, and then but Mariner and her continue to be good friends. Like she kind of stole her from him, and that does. I'm sorry, that is pushing her into the Mary Sue territory, and because what it is. All right, let's forget about that phrase though. But what it is that it's reinforcing that Boimler's an idiot and Mariner's like completely right and everything, and that's a really tired dynamic. They've had that dynamic in several episodes before, which again, if you want to have it once or twice, it works. But if you keep hitting that same beat and repeating it over and over again, it becomes tiresome. And plus, like, I think the script, by having that way, really distreats Boimler. I think he's a more interesting character if he's not the typical moron who always gets everything wrong and loses. And the fact that this says that, it turned out that he is too ugly to date someone, or too dorky to date someone that hot, I think that's a bit insulting. Honestly, I know not myself, but I've known people in real life who has, dated people more attractive than them. It happens. And I think, to me, it would be a lot more interesting if it was if it was just a normal thing, but Mariner was overreacting to it because of her previous experience. I think that would be a very interesting character beat for her, but by having it be some parasite, it completely ruins that. It completely ruins the whole storyline. It ruins her character. It ruins Boimler's character. And plus, let me get to the parasite thing, because that's bullshit. Now, I mentioned earlier, has the thing with the rich dude on the moon. I was willing, even though that logically doesn't make sense, I was willing to go with this. This parasite thing doesn't make logical sense, and I'm not willing to go with this because I don't think it earned it. Because, okay, if Boimler had this parasite for a month that makes him super attractive to women, now how come all the women on the Cerritos weren't attracted to him? How come Mariner didn't try to date him, or Tendi, or any of the other women? How come he wasn't swarmed with women? How come it was just this one girl he met at this different ship that was never around? That makes no sense. It's such plot convenience bullshit that I'm sorry, and I know I can hear people are going to say, well, Mark, is just a comedy. No, even in comedies, you need to have your plots do need to have a degree of logical sense. Like, watch BoJack Horseman. Like, even however silly and over the top that show is, their plots make logical sense. This is just plot convenience BS. And being a comedy does not excuse it. And also, it's a cheap laugh. As I said, it's like, oh, Boimler's such an idiot. Like, I don't like it. I don't like it. I think that was... Now, I do want to make something very clear at this point, because there's a lot of, haters of newer Trek who are constantly bring up this argument that the newer Trek likes to demasculize men and promote a feminist political agenda. And let me make something very extremely positively clear. I think that is misogynistic bullshit. I don't buy that for a second. So if you think that's what I'm saying, think again. I think that is total horseshit. But, so that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is, as character stories, as character beats, having Boimler be the pathetic loser and Mariner being the awesome bright person every time, that gets tired from a story standpoint, from a storytelling standpoint, from a character standpoint. It makes the characters flat and two-dimensional. I don't care what the hell their genders are. You could reverse it and have the male be all hot shit and the woman lose all the time. It doesn't matter. Just having those same character beats every single time is it's flat. And it's uninteresting, and it's not very good storytelling. But, so I hope, because that's what, and like I said, I liked that previous episode that showed Mariner had flaws, and I think this would be the perfect opportunity to hammer that home. It wouldn't change her character that she's really experienced. It wouldn't change Boimler's character that he's still a bit green and naive and all, just wanting to advance so far. It wouldn't change their characters at all. It would enhance their characters, but by doing this, it just makes their characters bland and uninteresting. So, anyway, my rating for Cupid's Errant arrow out of 10, I'm going to give this a 5 average. As I said, I don't think it's a terrible episode because there's things about it I liked. I was enjoying the Mariner storyline at first until that ending, and I liked the reveal about the rich asshole. Like, that was funny. But honestly, I think this is the least well written episode so far. I think the structure they should have thought it through more, and they're relying too much, particularly even with characters of Tendi and Rutherford and Mariner and Boimler, is that they are falling back to the same cliches that we already know about them, and they're not doing a good job of advancing their characters. So I hope the rest of the season does a better job at that. Anyway, that is it for my review of Lower Decks Season 1, Episode 5. I should be back next week and every week to cover new episodes of Lower Decks, so be sure to check out my channel for that, as well as I cover many other shows like BoJack Horseman, The Expanse, and many other Star Trek shows. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.